Hey, best friend, Dr. Britt here. Looking forward to our conversation today. We are going to be chatting about this whole concept of feminism and femininity. And so many times people even get confused on what that is and why we care. So let me just kind of start the process here. We live in a culture, at least in America, where feminism is something that's prized. And if you're a strong, driven woman, you must be a feminist. Now, something that I think that is interesting is even that the meaning of feminism has changed as our culture has changed, which isn't surprising. We have, words like sick. That's changed over time. Once it meant you're ill, now it means you're cool. Or lit. When I hear teenagers like, yeah, that's lit. Or lit has even changed into gas now. Like gas is something you put in your car, not how awesome something is. So words and the meanings of things change over time. And as you listen to me, you'll even hear me talk about this concept on a regular basis is the meaning that we make of things, the meaning that we make of things. And as meanings shift, and like I said, it happens all the time, the way that we see things really starts to transform and can even mean something that's totally different from the original intent. I would actually be willing to bet that if I say the word feminist, you have a picture in your mind of who she is. And I bet that if I say femininity, you also have a picture in your mind of who she is. These words, these concepts, they mean something to you. The question is, can they exist together? Do they mean the same thing? So for a brief moment, let's have a quick chat on the history of feminism. And don't worry, y'all, this isn't a history lesson. I'm not a history teacher, but I think it's important to understand where this came from so that you and I can actually together, as a conversation with best friends, really move into where this goes. So in the 18th century, the whole purpose of feminism was really to address women's quote unquote proper role in the world, and that women could be educated and that men didn't need to be the ones creating the expectation of who they are as women, and also that women were worth just as much as men in the public sphere. And that honestly, though, this really didn't gain a lot of headway during the time because even Queen Victoria herself disparaged and was against this idea. Which is interesting to me in and of itself. And in the 18th century, some of my favorite teen authors were birthed out of this time period. Jane Austen, Charlotte Bronte, Louisa May Alcott. They were feminists. And when we look back as women, by the way, we need to give John Neal, if you ever meet him someday, we need to give him a high five. In America, he was the first women's rights lecturer. And unfortunately, or fortunately, grateful that we had him, we needed a male to advocate for us as women, and he did. And maybe even the name Florence Nightingale rings a bell to you. I first or second grade, I did a presentation on Florence Nightingale. I have always been super pro women, even then, of looking for women who were strong and influential in their sphere, and she was one of them. And she became a nurse, and really she advocated during that time period that women should have the same properties, women should have the same opportunities, there's the right word, as men. And interestingly, though, during that time period, also her feminine qualities were emphasized over the fact that she was pushing for ingenuity in culture. And Then I'm going to briefly, just so you know where this came from, and I'm hoping that maybe your younger self is connecting with some of this because maybe you loved some of the authors that I loved. But there are a couple of waves of feminism, and I promise I'm going to make this make sense. Like, why am I even talking about this? I'm going to make it make sense. Just stay with me. So the first wave of feminism is what it's called in the 19th and 20th centuries. This is when women were overturning legal inequities and that they fought for women's right to vote. Hot dog way to go. This was a big deal and it was good. Elizabeth Cady Stanton is known for saying the worst feature of these assumptions is that women believe them themselves. And by the way, these assumptions had to do with that women weren't equal to men. So the worst feature of these assumptions was that women believe them themselves, that we were inferior. Now, by the way, anybody that's ever met a strong woman knows that she is a bad man pajama. And so often these days, women are leading companies, women are CEOs, women are directors of groups and things like that because we tend to have really good people skills. So my heart is grateful for the women that advocated for us to have the right to vote, that advocated for us to be the same legally on the same page, that we were just as valuable and worthy as men. Even in the 1940s during World War II, women were out of necessity, honestly, were working in large numbers, that they even established sports teams. And, amazingly, and much like today, women would work and then they would take care of the home, and they would work and then they would take care of the home. And again, just like today. Now, when men came back from war, this changed a little bit of that, but it started something. So then the second wave of feminism in the 1960s and 80s, this is when women were fighting gender norms and fighting cultural inequities and fighting for equal pay and for us to have the right to reproduce or have birth control or whatever, or the role of women in society. That in this time period, women's enrollment in higher education and women's studies, those were increasing. That women could, for the first time in history, women could hold their own mortgage. We could have credit cards in our name. When you could take the money that you were earning and you could actually do something with it. When. Now, by the way, I'm aware, and I'm just putting this sort of footnote in there, that there are other people that would be listening to this going, oh man, there were some negative things that happened during this time period, maybe even in regards to reproductive rights. Or some people would say those were really awesome things that happened during this time. Y'all, this podcast is not focused on that. You can go listen to other political podcasts. This ain't it. So in the third wave, 1990s, 2000s, they addressed really previous failures, things that they thought were previous failures. Some of this had to do with including the experiences of women of color in the LGBTQ population. In the first part of this too, women were fighting against sexual harassment in the workplace for the first time ever. For the first time ever. I remember when I was in college and I had a guy making very inappropriate comments to me on a regular basis. I don't even know why I'm telling this story, but I was so uncomfortable and I didn't do anything about it though. It's like I felt bad. I knew that if I told my boss, he would get fired. So I didn't tell her, even though I wanted him to get fired or I wanted it to stop, but I also felt bad that he would get fired. It's such an interesting thing to think about now. My much older self is like, Brittany, no, absolutely no. But my younger self, I remember even after he stopped working there, I told my boss about it. And she was like, why did you not come talk to me about that? I could have protected you, or I could have done something about it. And so thinking about sexual harassment in the workplace, great things were happening during this time. What's also interesting is that during this time period, women fought to be more girly girl. So you sort of saw this resurgence of high heels and girly type things that the second wave fought against, that they could wear more practical clothing in the second wave and do other things, whereas this part was fighting to be more quote unquote girly. And I want you to see that even the concept of feminism is constantly being redefined. And now we would be considered to be in the fourth wave. And again, I'm not going to stay here because I'm just letting you know where it came from, is that there's a fourth wave of feminism. And this part really continued to focus on sexual harassment, the objectification of women and sexism, and so continue to fight for that. And one of the biggest features, again, and this isn't a social justice or a political type podcast, but in terms of, I just want you to know where it came from. That internet activism was also a part of this. There was an intersectionality, which means really focusing on where these marginalized groups meet together. And so advocating for that part forward. This was a really big shift. And so I just want you to recognize that the concept of feminism continued to be redefined over and over and over. Redefined where there were failures, redefined from we can be more practical to let's be more girly. And so there are these parts. And so then we have to ask ourselves, where does femininity come into this? And why in the world, Dr. Britt, are like we sitting here as besties having a conversation about feminism and now femininity? So I'm going to just identify myself right now. A lot of people in the world walk around with identities. I'm going to identify myself to you. So I'm a working, married mama. And I am all about equal rights, equal pay, voting, being able to pursue our dreams, not having to put up with sexual harassment in the workplace. Can we just please go back and talk to 20-year-old Brittany? But at the same time, something was lost. As a culture, we lost something. Women, we lost something in our fight to be equal, because we are equal in our worth as people and our value as people and our intellectual abilities as people. But women are different than men. Now, I recognize somebody's going to disagree with this, but for the majority, women are different than men. And, I mentioned our main man in the 1800s, John Neal, lecturing Americans for women's rights. And what he said was, women aren't intellectually inferior. Women are just different. My man, John Neal, high five him someday. If we meet each other later, high five him. So let's talk about, just for a moment, this concept of femininity. And by the way, being a stay-at-home mama, how you dress, the things that you do doesn't necessarily mean that you are feminine or you embody feminine traits. For example, you could be a stay-at-home mama, but you walk around in this more masculine energy. I'll use the word energy. No one get weird about energy. Some people are like, woo, energy, yes. And then other people are like, oh, don't you be talking about that energy thing. That's weird. Okay, let me just, energy, when I'm talking about energy right here, I'm defining the meaning for you. It's what we're putting off to those around us. So more feminine traits tend to be soft and tender and open and nurturing, whimsical, emotional. There's beauty and intuition, sensual, mysterious, responsive. I want you to just get a picture of this in your head. And a lot of these, by the way, feminine traits tend to be more states of being. I am this way. I am tender. I am nurturing. I'm responsive, but it's not this doing thing. Now, more masculine traits tend to be strong, protector, fierce, provision, ambition, fortitude, guard, adventurous, aggressive risk taker, focus, chivalrous. When you think about a masculine man, there you're going to get a picture of what that looks like. And by the way, masculinity is a lot more of a doing energy than it is a being energy. Now, with that said, all who are listening to me, we all, whether you are male or female, have some of these traits, both masculine and feminine. Let me say that again. We all have masculine and feminine traits. No matter if you are male or female, you have these traits. Now here's the problem, and this is where I believe, and this I'm giving you an opinion, although I see this in my office, is that when we are dealing with masculine and femininity, we sort of get so focused on sometimes becoming something that we're not. For example, women in the workplace, they often feel that they have to be a bitch to get something, to make it happen, to be that person. Or if they're a strong woman, they get labeled that way. Now, sometimes that could be a sort of masculine strength coming out that often even women who are in the work field and the work for companies, things like that, girl boss, whatever, that you have to feel like you have this front that you're putting out. You have to have a masculine energy in order to sit in a room full of men and be able to go toe to toe with them, in order to be able to push your view forward, in order to make something happen. Because, sometimes when we think about feminine women, we're like, oh, you're just so kind and tender, and when you ask for something, it's like, oh, would you please mind doing this thing for me? Or, we need to make this happen by Friday. Would you be willing to do that? Whereas someone maybe in a more feminine strength may say, hey, Steve, this needs to happen by Friday. Got it? Good. All right. And then move on. And by the way, that woman can still be incredibly nurturing, but in a workplace need to carry a masculine, need to walk in more of a masculine energy. Now, one thing I find with women, and I think feminism is a part of this, because we so want to be like men, or we were said that we were equal to men, that we needed to look like men. So we needed to be strong and aggressive and pursuing and protecting and guarding and all of these things, except what if we could be both? What if we could be both? What if, sis, you could be strong and nurturing? What if you could aggressively pursue your dreams and play with your kids or enjoy cooking dinner? What if you could do both? And I'm here to challenge you that we can do both. We can be both. But in order to be the best version of ourselves, and by the way, let me qualify this. There are some women that are more masculine in nature than others. And I would suggest that a lot of women are much more feminine in their nature. That is a part of our being. But we often carry masculinity as a way to protect who we feel like we have to be. And so when I bring it back to feminism, I think about with the reproductive movement, with the movement that said utilize birth control, with the movement that said women are equal to men. We also sort of came up with this concept, we women, whoever we women is, that we came up with this concept that women should just also be able to sleep with whoever they want, whenever they want, just like men, with no consequence. But there is a consequence. At what cost? I have had women tell me that they can sleep around or sleep with whoever they want, whenever they want, without consequence. And they're lying to themselves because there's a cost. There's a cost to giving your body to someone as a woman, because biologically, we take in a man. Men don't do that. Biologically, we take in a man. And from an anatomical perspective, what is happening is there's a vulnerable exchange that's happening. Well, in order to sleep with whoever I want, whenever I want, I have to become hard. I have to pretend, forsake my emotional, nurturing, tender, responsive, sometimes even sensual nature. I have to do that in order to become hard. And then I have to pretend, by the way, that it's it is a pretending. I'm telling you the truth. You're my best friend. That we have to pretend that it's without consequence. Now, that's going to take on another aggressive trait, which is a masculine trait. I have to become aggressive in order to do that. This isn't without consequence. And then I have to put up a shield. I have to protect myself. So I have to be hard, aggressive, strong, and then I have to put up a shield. And by the way, when you put up a shield as a woman, you're hiding things that are on the inside of you that are incredibly beautiful, whimsical, tender, playful, because I can't actually expose the vulnerable, beautiful parts of me because I have you here, because it's not safe to be close to you. And by the way, this doesn't just happen when we sleep around. This can happen as a consequence of being hurt by men, letting them into places that they don't belong in our own heart. So that can happen also. And then I want you to recognize that women, this, if you've ever used it especially, that you can trade sex for love, for significance, for control. And I just want to be really clear. This isn't just a single woman's problem. Married women do this too. I'm going to give you sex to get love. I'm going to give you sex to get things. I'm going to give you sex to control you. Yeah. And then we start to put again, this is that's even that masculine trait of ambition. I'm using sex as a tool to get something that I want to have. This is guarded. I'm guarded when I do this. And then all of a sudden we start to carry, and not all of a sudden, we start to carry these more masculine traits because we had to abandon women. We had to abandon our true nature in order to do this. We had to abandon our true nature in order to be hard, to have sex without consequence. And this doesn't, I want to say this also, it doesn't just happen when we sleep around. It might happen when we say yes to sex and we don't actually want to say yes to sex. Committed or non-committed, doesn't matter, because you're giving of your openness, your softness, your tenderness, the parts that are connected to your emotional being, you give of those parts, and then you have to protect them. So as women, we have to be really careful of who we give these parts of ourselves to. And if you're like, Dr. Britt, what in the world? What are you even talking about? What right do you have to be talking about sex? Well, also you should know that I'm a sex therapist. I haven't really talked about that yet, but that is a part of what I do. So let's come back to this. In order for us to walk around equal, quote unquote, equal to men, aka be a man, in order for us to walk around as a man, I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, have whatever I want, be with whoever I want. We have to abandon our true nature to do this. If we're soft and tender and playful and vulnerable, then we are actually wired to have a man protect us, guard us, be strong for us. And by the way, this doesn't mean that you're weak. This doesn't mean you're weak. I think that it actually takes a lot more strength in order to go, hey, let me be vulnerable and playful and show you all these parts of me that nobody else sees, that only you get to see. Or I think about my daughter. She gets parts of me that no one else gets. My husband gets parts of me that no one else gets. I had some friends that took me out for my birthday, and I was being ridiculously silly in the car. They could vouch for this if they were here with me right now. They could vouch for it. And they get a part of me that no one gets because it's safe with them. I can be vulnerable and playful and fun. And those parts of me that are very woman, very safe. So at what cost are we paying when we try to operate as men in the world? And this isn't a commentary on anything LGBTQ plus. Y'all need to take this out of the discussion. This isn't about that. What cost, ladies, are you wearing? What cost are you paying when you try to wear a masculine covering in the world? What happens is you get into a long-term committed relationship and you struggle to trust. You believe maybe that men are pigs, or they're just going to cheat on you eventually, and they just want you for your body. But ironically, best friend, you traded your body. You traded your emotional safety, and you used it as a currency for control and power and significance and love. And I sit here in front of you, like, as your friend, and I say, at what cost? At what cost? Because you paid for this. You're paying for this. If you're married, your marriage is paying for this. If you want to be married, you currently are paying for this, and your future relationship will pay for it when you walk around carrying a masculine shield. Because it's never who you were intended to be. It's not who God made you to be. He did not make you to be a man. He made you to be soft and tender and playful and emotional, and be open and beautiful and intuitive and kind of mysterious and sensual. And by the way, sensual is not the same as sexual. Sensual is just the ability to engage in your senses. If you look at the time, and I'm not talking about as a result of insecurity, if you look at the time that women take to care for themselves, there is so much sensuality in that, from the temperature of the shower to the smell of the body lotion, or the body wash and the hair wash, and then the products we put in our hair and the makeup we put on our face, and maybe even the taste of the toothpaste that you use, whatever it is, the flavor of lipstick, the gum that you chew, those sorts of things, recognizing all of that's a part of our sensual nature. And then we sacrifice it. We sacrifice it. At what cost? To walk around carrying this masculine shield that's strong and aggressive and focused and driven and adventurous and ambitious, and all focused on provision and being fierce. These things, we sacrifice it. We sacrifice it. We stop being our tender, playful, fun selves. And if this is you, you're listening to me and you're going, mother of pearl, I do this. I do this. And if you do this, by the way, you often feel stuck. If you're with a partner, you wonder why he doesn't do the things that you keep asking him to do, and then you step in and do said things because he's incompetent. Probably not, but he is. And you wonder why you don't have close girlfriends, why people react to you the way that they do. You wonder if you're some of the negative female labels that people have given you. You wonder that. You walk around feeling heavy because if you were walking out your feminine nature, your feminine energy, you feel really light. I can tell personally how heavy I feel when I'm operating in my masculine. I have to do very specific things. I'll talk about that in a future podcast, but I have to do very specific things to get myself to walk in my feminine nature. Because that's who I am. It's who I am. And it's, my husband would even tell you it's far more attractive when I'm in that, my feminine than I am my masculine, because I start to feel like eventually I start to feel overworked. My sex drive tanks. I tend to have a little bit more anxiety show up. I feel more concerned about our financial situation, whatever it is, when I'm operating in this masculine energy. And it's not mine. Now, I have had to learn to step in to that masculine energy because some situations warrant it and need it. But that's like putting on a hat and saying, all right, I'm going to be who I need to be right now in this given scenario. And then I take off the hat because it's not who I am. It's just who I needed to be in the moment. Take off the hat, walk out, and engage in that nature. So I want you to hear me as your best friend. As your best friend. It's my job to tell you the truth. Even when it's controversial, it's important to me to tell you the truth. If I don't tell you the truth, am I really your best friend? Probably not. So I want you to know that feminism is not the enemy, although I do believe that the pendulum swung. And as a result of the pendulum swinging, there are some negative impacts. And so I want you to hear me, bestie. I want you to hear me right now. You were created to walk in tenderness and openness and playfulness, to be whimsical and to play and to be receptive. And that is such a part of your natural nature. It's yours. And if that's not what you're walking around in the majority of the time, you're probably carrying a masculine shield. And you're not quite getting out of relationships, even with yourself, the things that you want to have. So I have some questions for you. You know me. I like to leave you with questions, things to think about. And if you're in front of me, we talk about it. Am I carrying a masculine shield? What feminine parts of me have I forsaken in order to protect myself? And number 3, what changes do I need to make today in order to walk out my feminine nature? What changes do I need to make today? Everything's today. If we wait till tomorrow, tomorrow never comes. What changes do I need to make today in order to walk in my feminine nature? Best friend, I'm with you. I care about you. And this is the beginning of a conversation for us on femininity. This is the beginning. So I want you to recognize that you and I are about to go on a journey together, pulling out the best, most beautiful parts of who we are, and to begin to walk in those things, to begin to be who we were created to be, to show up in the way that we want to show up for the people that we love, and most importantly for ourselves, so then we can show up for those people that we love so well. So I'm going to ask you those questions one more time. Am I carrying a masculine shield? Number 2, what feminine parts of me have I forsaken in order to protect myself? And number 3, what changes do I need to make today, in order to walk out my feminine nature? Hey, best friend. It was great to be with you today. I look forward to our time together. And until next week.